4 new cases in New South Wales today.
One of those was announced yesterday. It was a man in his 30s who lives in the Sydney CBD, and also a woman in her 30s. She was a close contact of that gentleman in his 30s.
The other 2 cases are also close contacts, but the state is still on alert, extending the inner Sydney mask mandate to indoor areas.
That will include things like hospitality workers, shopping, retail shopping, any indoor activity where you're not eating or drinking. You will need to wear a mask.
The public transport mask rule now extended beyond the CBD.
In Greater Sydney, we've asked everybody to wear a mask on public transport until Wednesday midnight or Thursday morning. We are now going to do that as well in Wollongong and Shell Harbour local government areas.
Premier pleading for community testing to ramp up, with yesterday's number below 25,000.
We're pleased with that, but we do want more testing. The higher the rate of testing, the more confidence we'll have that we've captured all the cases that are currently circulating in the community.
Up north, Queensland's recorded a new case from a member of a flight crew.
On the flight that she was on when she came back from Dubai to Brisbane, there was a passenger who tested positive with the Delta variant, and she was a contact of that passenger. So that's the most likely source.
The woman had completed 2 weeks of hotel quarantine and returned 3 negative tests. Only on day 14, after she'd re-entered the community, did she test positive.
I don't want the community to be alarmed at this stage because the woman was only out in the community for a short period of time.
Queenslanders and Sydney-siders all urged to keep checking the list of exposure sites, as both states battle to keep the Delta strain under control.
Bill Bautau is a strategic health policy consultant with the University of New South Wales, and he joins us now. Bill, this flight crew member in Queensland tested negative on day 0, day 5 and day 12, then positive on day 14. What should we take away from that?
Well, I think we've got to understand the Delta variant that the Queensland Chief Health Officer spoke about is much more contagious than the COVID we had to deal with last year. It's transmitted in air, and I'm sure they're going to be very concerned about how this transpired in the hotel quarantine. Did the flight crew attendant develop the virus in the hotel? That is, was it transmitted by air within the hotel or for some other reason? So it's a big concern. It seems very odd that it would be on day 14 that it only became apparent that a positive test was being returned.
Bill, it's early days, but the numbers in Sydney do seem low. Do you think that the state can get it under control without a lockdown?
Well, let's hope so, but we saw in the Northern Beaches episode just before Christmas last year how quickly very few cases can become many, a couple of hundred cases before we had to move into a lockdown on the Northern Beaches. So we don't want to repeat that. It's very bad news for the people who contract COVID. Our hearts go out to them. But of course, in the last few days, we see the massive economic disruption that is caused in the eastern suburbs and elsewhere in Sydney as these lists of exposure sites lengthen. Now, the reason we've got to deal with this is because, yet again, the quarantine arrangements at Sydney Airport have failed us. The driver was not wearing the best possible PPE and doesn't seem to have been vaccinated. And that's how it got out into the community. Now, the cost of getting that right at Sydney is trivial compared to the costs that the community's now incurring because we're having to go through this progressive expansion of masking and lockdowns and so, reporting and so on. Now, this is just not good enough, and it's really got to change.
Bill, you recently posted on social media that in the middle of last year, our federal government rejected offers from Pfizer and Moderna for Australia to have priority delivery. Does the government have questions to answer over this?
Yes, it does. One of the big problems we have in Australia now is only 3.2% of Australians are fully vaccinated. And that's way behind the comparable countries. The UK, 45, 46% of all adults there are fully vaccinated. Israel, it's 57. In Australia, it's 3.2. And why is that? Because, as we saw the Premier of New South Wales said tonight, there is a real problem with supply. And the supply goes back to the decision taken by the federal government last year to only go with AstraZeneca. They made that decision on the 19th of August on commercial and political grounds, not medical advice, really, and to reject the offers that were made by Pfizer and Moderna to have priority access to production of the mRNA vaccines. Now, had we secured that priority access by the beginning of this year, we would have had sufficient vaccines delivered from Pfizer, I think, to vaccinate all Australians. So today, at the beginning of winter, we would be having vaccination coverage rates comparable to the countries that did the right thing, backed all the horses in the race, if you like, but certainly had enough supply to vaccinate their populations rapidly.
All right, Bill Bartell, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time tonight.
OK, thank you.
With so much content online, it's sometimes hard to keep up with it all. And let's face it, who has the time? The Project YouTube has you covered with the stories that matter. Hit subscribe for a daily list of the news that you need to know.